All right, man, peace. So, former starting quarterback of the Buffalo Bills, Tyrod Taylor, feels that black quarterbacks are held to a higher standard than their Caucasian counterparts. Of course, they're going to talk about it, and I'm going to chime in.
Welcome back. Greg Jennings is back, and we're joined now by Super Bowl champ Eric Davis. Let's move to Buffalo. The Bills benched Tyrod Taylor yesterday. I didn't like that. In favor of rookie Nathan Peterman, I have no idea who he is. Not surprisingly, the quarterback says he doesn't agree with the decision, and he's not the only one, with activist journalist Sean King tweeting that Taylor was benched because of his race. Judging by comments Taylor made a few weeks ago, he might agree. He's saying, quote, "Bill is going to be twice as bad just because of who I am, an African-American quarterback. Look across the league, man. We're held to a certain standard. We almost have to be perfect."
Look, let me say this quickly in regards to Tyrod Taylor's sentiment. Yes, here in this society, the so-called black man is held to a higher standard of propriety. Why is that? Because as I've stated incessantly on this channel, we're behind enemy lines. If we want to set our own standards, then we have to have our own society. You cannot look to the Caucasian man to judge you or evaluate you on the same level that he would his own. It's unnatural and it's unreasonable. And beyond that, let me also say this. The so-called black man is viewed as a superman when it comes to the physical, when it comes to the athletic. He just is. And I've touched on this sentiment numerous times, particularly in regards to people like Max Kellerman or Skip Bayless. When they talk about a guy like a LeBron James, they talk about him like how they would somebody who they don't view as human. They don't view the so-called black man as a regular person. They believe that he has a higher pain threshold and that he has higher capabilities.
Whitlock, you agree with what Taylor's saying here?
There was a time when I absolutely agreed with him, but that time has passed. And there's so much money to be made for winning and holding on to your job that I just don't think coaches and general managers, and hell, I'll even go all up to ownership, can make decisions based off of this.
Look, let me say this quickly. There was a time, back even when I first started watching football, that it was very, very rare to see a so-called black quarterback. I mean, when I was a kid, the number one black quarterback was Warren Moon in the AFC, and in the NFC you had Randall Cunningham. And of course, they had to excel in order to stay in the league. Like they did have to excel. In today's NFL, black quarterbacks who back in the 90s, they would have been switched over to wide receiver. Now they actually get a chance to stay at quarterback. So are they still evaluated on the same level as their Caucasian counterparts? No, it's never going to be quote unquote equal because you don't view two different things equally. So the black man's never going to be evaluated on an equal level as the Caucasian quarterback because they're not equal, meaning they're not the same. They're just not. And people can come with a lot of the moralizing, well, you know, we're all humans. Look, people are going to make evaluations. Most people buy what they see. And there are certain connotations based off of perception. It's not always just outright racism. Sometimes it's just racialism. When people see certain things, it resonates with them on a subconscious level. And that's just how it is. That's just how it goes. But the so-called black man does get a little bit more of the benefit of the doubt today because of how the defenses are so fast. You have to have mobile quarterbacks.
I disagree with the Tyrod Taylor decision.
So do I.
It's football incompetence.
Yes.
I don't think it's race that's done this. I'll give just a short example. Covering the Kansas City Chiefs for years, we had a quarterback, Rich Gannon, and he was in a fight with Elvis Grbac, and the entire city and the entire locker room wanted Rich Gannon to be the quarterback. They wouldn't do it. Rich Gannon left and became an MVP of the league, carried the team to a Super Bowl. It was insanity what the Chiefs did.
I remember that because as a kid, I was a San Francisco 49ers fan. And for those of you who remember, Joe Montana got his back broke by Leonard Marshall, who came and just smashed him dead in the middle of his back in the NFC title game in 1991. Giants were in San Francisco. San Francisco was going for a three-peat. They lost to the Giants in San Francisco. Joe Montana gets his back broken. And then you bring in Steve Young, who was one of the most proficient quarterbacks of that time period and of all time. Even though Steve Young was a little bit overrated, for those of you who saw him, He was a guy who put up great proficiency numbers, but in big games he always came up small. I mean, other than the Terrell Owens catch and the NFC Championship game in San Francisco, which they still almost blew to the Dallas Cowboys, he always came up small in big games. But anyway, he was replaced by Elvis Grbac. Well, I should say he was replaced by Elvis Grbac when he got hurt. And Elvis Grbac came in and played great in a backup role while Steve Young was hurt. That's when Jerry Rice had his biggest season. A lot of people don't know that. A lot of people always talk about how Jerry Rice was the beneficiary of Joe Montana and Steve Young. Jerry Rice actually had his greatest single season with Elvis Grbac at quarterback. So that's how Elvis got the opportunity with Kansas City. And that leads us into what Jason Whitlock is talking about here.
Yeah. But it happens.
Hey, listen, I thought Tyrod Taylor got hosed. By the way, the irony is they're playing the Chargers, who have a great pass rush. It's the one game of the year on the schedule you'd be like, Tyrod Taylor is going to be an essential part of our escape route against that.
Well, I don't know. Maybe the coach for Buffalo is seeing something in practice that we're not seeing. Maybe he's seeing something in practice. I personally like Tyrod. I think that Tyrod has done a lot with not too much. He does not have great receivers. He does have a great running back. He does a pretty good job. There may be something going on in the locker room between him and the coach for him to come out and say that he feels like he's being judged differently than his Caucasian counterpart. Maybe he's feeling a certain energy in the locker room from the coach. Who knows? Sometimes it takes certain things. Sometimes it takes certain things a certain amount of time to be brought to the surface.
But I would say this. Take a look at I agree with you. Warren Moon, it's outrageous. If Warren Moon
had to go to Canada.
By the way, I grew up in Seattle. He was the first quarterback. He was my Marino and Elway as a kid.
Yeah, Warren Moon was one of the great pure passers of the football ever. Problem with Warren was that also in the playoffs, there'd always be a game with Warren with like 3 interceptions, man. Like, I remember the game that they had in Buffalo where they gave up that huge lead. I had to go outside for something. I came back. I mean, when I left the crib, they was up 31-10 or 31-3, something like that. I come back and they lost the game. I'm like, what the hell happened? Warren Moon was one of those guys, playing with the Three Amigos in the run and shoot offense, put up huge numbers. One of the first quarterbacks, along with Marino, in that era, in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, who would customarily throw for over 4,000 yards. Back when it really meant something back then. The first guy to really do it numerous times was Dan Fouts. But in the late 80s, early 90s, Warren Moon used to light up the NFL. But he could never win a big game either.
He was incredible. He took rainy Washington into national prominence. But look at Michael Vick. Look at how it's grown. Michael Vick was not only inconsistent on the field, he went to prison, was welcomed back into the league. By the way, came back and had an incredible year. Mike Vick's career was about in, out, up, down, imprisonment, acceptance.
No, Michael Vick's career was about being a fuck up. That's what his career was about. And taking his good fortune for granted and still trying to connect with the quote-unquote hood. That's what Michael Vick's career was about. Michael Vick's career was about not studying his playbook and not trying to make himself the best quarterback he could be. Because Mike Vick had everything except for size. I mean, he was like 5'11 and a half, 6 feet, had a gun for an arm, and could outrun wide receivers. But he didn't spend enough time in the film room trying to perfect his craft. And, of course, we all know about the bad decisions he made off the field. But, the good news for him is that he seems to have matured and he's grown past it. So, sometimes it's best to not dwell on the past as long as everything has turned out okay.
I think Michael would acknowledge. I know Michael well enough. He would acknowledge I was given second and third chances. Vic said, listen, I didn't study early in this game.
Well, that's more of a reflection of his extraordinary talent. People give you more chances based off of what they think you have to offer. A guy is more likely to make up with a girlfriend who is beautiful and sexy and all that rather than somebody who's average and doesn't bring anything to the table. If they fall out, he's more likely to make up with the hot chick than the chick who is just regular and doesn't even have any other intangibles to bring to the table. Michael Vick, he represented that hot chick. He represented somebody who was a phenomenon in Atlanta. So It's just interesting. He went to jail as a Falcon and came out as an Eagle.
But people liked his talent, gave him chance after chance after chance, even after incarceration. So I don't think Russell Wilson, I mean, Cam Newton's been up and down. Carolina's all in on Cam Newton because he was a #1 pick, and he's physically gifted. There's nobody else out there like Cam.
So then you just answered the question. So do I believe that an African-American quarterback has to be perfect? No, I disagree with him on it. You don't have to be perfect. You have to keep your job, you have to be efficient at every position.
And proficient. There's not going to be too many black quarterbacks that they allow to just hover around in the NFL who are just average. I'll put it like that. Like, you can't be a black Jay Cutler. Okay? That's not going to fly. You can't be a black Jay Cutler. You can't be a black Trevor Siemian. Like, if Trevor Siemian was a so-called black man, he would not have even lasted through last season. All right? So the differences are definitely there. Point being is, you can never expect the Caucasian to evaluate you on the same level as he would his own. The same way, if you had a league that was dominated and run by so-called blacks, you would not expect them to evaluate a Caucasian as they would their own. It's just natural.
In this league, you have to be efficient. You have to be effective, very effective as the quarterback. I mean, there are white quarterbacks that lose their job, and right now guys are talking about why isn't that guy being benched because they're not effective. I do agree, though, that you have to be in the names you mentioned: Michael Vick, Russell Wilson, Cam Newton. That's above average talent. Oh, yeah. You do have to be above average to have a career in the NFL as a black quarterback. I do think that's a real thing.
Oh, absolutely. There's no doubt about that. You have to be borderline potential for transcendent. Like, you have to be, they have to see a potential for you to be transcendent, for you to last. I mean, a lot of people don't understand. Randall Cunningham, and that name might resonate with certain people. Maybe they didn't see him play. Cats might have been a little young to have seen him play. Say, okay, yeah, I know him. He was the black quarterback. He could run. Randall Cunningham was a 2-time NFL MVP. Like, he was dominant, man, when he was healthy. He was dominant until he got his leg broke. And then he kind of drifted around the league, and then he caught fire in Minnesota in that legendary 98 season when they broke all the records. But Randall Cunningham was incredible, and that's what you had to be back then. If you were NFL, that's why I say that in the NFL in the NFC you had Randall Cunningham, in the AFC you had Warren Moon. So Randall Cunningham was bringing something that no other quarterback could bring. I'll never forget. I saw a game, Philadelphia against Buffalo. Never forget it. I think it was 1990, and Randall Cunningham had 2 wide receivers, Fred Barnett and Calvin Williams. I believe the other guy's name was Calvin Williams. And they were in Buffalo. And cats might remember this game. It was a tremendous regular season game. It was back when Buffalo first came with the no-huddle offense. And they were running up. They were just running through teams. They had Thurman Thomas, they had Andre Reed, James Lofton. And Randall Cunningham had the ball on the 1-yard line. And this guy scrambled in the end zone and threw the ball out, all the way out on a bomb, while falling back. Threw it all the way out to like the 40-yard line, the opposing team's 45-yard line. And Fred Barnett caught it and ran to the end zone for a touchdown. That play always sticks out in my mind. Randall Cunningham used to compete at the NFL Quarterback Challenge. For those of you brothers who remember, back in the early 90s, they used to have something called the Quarterback Challenge, where all the quarterbacks would go and they would compete to see who was the most accurate, who could throw the ball the farthest. Randall Cunningham was the only quarterback I've ever seen who threw the football 80 yards. He threw it 80 yards. I mean, that guy had unbelievable talent.
You can be subpar and be a backup in this league as a white quarterback for a long, long time.
Let me throw Kirk Cousins at you. Let me just throw this out. Kirk Cousins, if he was African American with those numbers and he was franchise tagged, do you think it would be an issue? He's throwing for 5,000 yards a year and cannot get an organization to back him. And I'm asking, I am throwing this out there. If he was African American, do you believe?
Race would definitely. The
conversation
would happen.
The conversation would happen. I don't think it would happen because he's being franchised. Look how much money he's making.
Okay.
Well, look, I see both points. To Colin's attempt at a point, if you had a black guy hit throwing for 4,800 yards a year, like Kirk Cousins does, and the team didn't want to commit long term. I'm sure that there would be people out there who would say that it seems to be a racial situation, but as long as he was being compensated, like Eric Davis is saying, at $25 million a year, I don't think that the conversation will go too far. Okay, because I don't think that. I think that if there was a black quarterback that was throwing for 4,800 yards a year, the team would make a long-term commitment, because that would be like finding that'd be like finding a gold nugget, because they would assume that if a quarterback was black and he was throwing for 4,800 yards a year, that he also could run. Like, that's what they're thinking when they look at Deshaun Watson. They're looking at a guy who could run and also could throw for 4,800 yards a year. Like, Deshaun Watson has the potential to be a combination of Randall Cunningham and Warren Moon. So that's why I don't really see the feasibility in that scenario. I don't see there being a black quarterback throwing for 4,700 yards a year and not getting a long-term deal. I just don't see it. I think that Kirk Cousins is not getting a long-term deal because it's like, dude, we drafted you in the 3rd, 4th round. We're still not sure. We see you come up small in big spots. So we're going to string you along as long as we can. Make sure that we know what we're getting.
Okay. And my whole issue, I get it, with Kirk Cousins is because they know more about Kirk Cousins than anyone. That organization. And that organization is afraid to pull the trigger for some reason. Yeah. That they are privy to a lot more than we are.
Well, I think it has to do with where they drafted him. I also think that it has to do with how he has performed in clutch situations. Certain little things. And like you said, they may know something about him that we don't know. Who knows?
So that wouldn't bother me. Okay. When you franchise a guy, you're paying him $20-something million a year. How upset can he be?
Again, Buffalo could argue we know more about Tyrod Taylor.
That's very true.
To the point you made, I think there was a period in time where at this position, quarterback, this would be the case. African American quarterbacks had to pretty much be perfect. I think the issue here is when you talk about the Cam Newtons, you talk about the Russell Wilson, you talk about even the Deshaun Watson, up and coming. These are franchise guys. They've been tagged and labeled as franchise players.
Yeah.
Quarterbacks. That's a huge difference. When you have not been labeled as that,
that's a good point.
You have to be better. And look at Joe Flacco. He got labeled as a franchise guy.
Yeah.
He's been given chance after chance after chance the last few years.
Same with Tannehill.
Because they were labeled franchise quarterbacks. Yeah. When you get that label, you have leeway. If you've never gotten if you've never gotten that label, you don't have that type of leash.
And that's very true. Tyrod was a backup for a certain period of time, I believe for like 2 or 3 years behind Joe Flacco, if I remember correctly. Same thing with my man over Kirk Cousins over there in Washington. When you've been a backup for 2 or 3 years, it is going to take longer for a team to truly believe in you. And Tyrod, even though I think that he's serviceable and pretty good, he hasn't done anything in his time starting to make you say that he could potentially be transcendent. So it is going to be easier for them to pull the plug on him than it would for them to pull the plug on somebody else who's been labeled a quote-unquote franchise guy, as Greg Jennings has said so well.
The point Eric's making, I think, is a valid one. Charlie Batch is about the only guy I can remember had a great career as a backup. Because there's great backup careers. You make a lot of money, you don't do a lot of work, but I get you have to. Now, I know Charlie Batch a little because I follow him, played in the Mid-American Conference. There is a way you have to carry yourself as a backup. And again, it's a different discipline than being a starter.
Vince Evans.
That it is.
Yeah. And so again, have we mastered that discipline? But I agree with Eric.
When he says, have we mastered that discipline, is Whitlock talking about black quarterbacks, or is he talking about what is he talking about in general? One has to wonder because he didn't specify. But I'm going to assume that he was saying, have black quarterbacks mastered how to conduct themselves as backups? We all know that the backup basically has to be he has to be a jack of all trades. He has to be a psychologist for the quarterback coach and for the starter. He has to know the game plan as if he were to start that week. he has to also be able to command the team. The team has to like him. So I'm guessing that Whitlock is saying that many black quarterbacks don't know how to just chill when they're not getting the starting position, which, one could understand due to most likely a lot of the insecurities that a black quarterback would have if he were the backup as opposed to the starter. I think, to be quite honest with you, I think that most black quarterbacks, if they were the backup, eventually they would assume that they're on their way out, because it's very, very hard to be a career backup as a black quarterback. Most teams are like, we could bring in a white boy to stand there and hold a clipboard. It's like at any other job. If they see a black man standing there looking like he's doing nothing, they're going to assume that he's lazy, and all type of other racial connotations, subconscious connotations are going to start to come into effect. So I understand where Whitlock is coming from that sentiment, but it's kind of a symbiotic thing when you're talking about if a black man would know how to, or if a black quarterback would know how to exude a lot of those attributes, or if he does not exude those attributes because he knows that no matter how much he tries to embody those traits, he's still on his way out anyway. Either they're going to make him play another position or he's going to get cut, no matter how much he knows the playbook and how well he's liked or how supportive he is of the starter.
I do think in people's minds, they have it like, oh, backup quarterback, it's a white guy, he's this, he's this. And we don't get seen in that regard.
For the most part, they're always viewed as athletic guys,
right.
That can scramble, can do all these
Absolutely.
things that don't necessarily fit certain systems. And I say all the time, there are quarterbacks that hit the field that can't play in any one system.
Right, but look, we all know that it's implied that a Caucasian quarterback can learn better than a black quarterback can learn. That's truly what's implied. And that's why the Caucasian quarterback is allowed to be mediocre more than a black quarterback is. That's why they're allowed to be the backup. Once again, the best way to achieve true validity is by self-determination. So you can never expect for that paradigm of or that archetype of the black quarterback having to play at a higher level than everybody else to change when you decided to relegate yourself to a framework that is presided over by Caucasian males. That's just how it goes.
That you have on your roster that simply can't play. So how do they fit the system when they aren't good enough to play? So, and I don't even think it's a question of learning to be in that position, because there's a different mentality, agreed. But they're not given the opportunity to be in that position, to say that I can be the quarterback like a Charlie Batch was, who was given that position. Yeah. And whenever he came in, he produced as a backup.
I think.
Well, he played pretty well. I remember Charlie Batch with the Steelers. He played pretty well. And, a lot help along with that is that the Rooneys have put out the image of themselves as a liberal sports family, as we know, with them being the head of the Rooney Rule, so on and so forth.
I think your point off the top was what Buffalo did is football incompetence more than anything. This is an organization that gave Ryan Fitzpatrick a major deal because he had a good game at home in September. Nobody's ever signed a quarterback to a deal in September. Yeah. This is a low self-esteem sports city. Agreed.
That has not, and as Colin said, very low self-esteem. I mean, their claim to fame is going to 4 straight Super Bowls. That's like somebody claiming that they're the best side dude in the world.
Like the Mets, the Clippers. There are these organizations that have suffered loss, and they just make bad decisions. I think Buffalo feels like we're close to New England. It's November, and they rush to make a poor decision.
Yeah, this is definitely not the right decision.
And I do think there's some financial element to this. They've been trying to back out of his contract for a while, and this is just they're moving on from Tyrod.
Yeah. Look, that's what I said. Tyrod is that guy who's like in these so-called relationships in this society. Well, you're nice, but we don't really have the same goals, and we're not going the same direction. So it's best that that's who Tyrod is. Tyrod is the guy who just he's just there to occupy some space and some time until they move on to the person that they really feel like they want. So hopefully Tyrod can catch on with another team. It'll probably be for the best in his career that he move on to another team. There are a lot of teams that can use a guy like a Tyrod Taylor. Hell, imagine how much better Jacksonville would be if they had somebody like him.
Tyrod Taylor.
Yes.
The head coach wants someone there. And this happens in this league. They move on from you quickly. All right, coming.
But anyway, I hope for the best for Tyrod. Believe me, there are worse problems that you can have than being benched and still getting paid. So I would not worry too much about quote-unquote racism in regards to how long of a leeway they allow you in the NFL. There's always going to be somebody that wants you because there's a lot of bad teams out there. But anyway, peace.